Very interesting topic of commerce in gaming. Let me start by inviting our panelists today. So we have with us Mayur, who is the founder and CEO of Hypernova Game, and we have Krishnendu, who is the founder and CEO of Giga Studio. Great. So I think let's get started and let people join in the meanwhile. A lot of interesting things to cover today, but fundamentally, before we get into all of this,
Hello.
It would be amazing if we have at least the audience know about what you are, who you are, what you're trying to build, and then let's get into the gaming part of things, commerce part of things. So, Krish, would you like to go first?
Yeah. Thank you, Shreyans. Welcome, everybody. Hi, I'm Krishnendu Mukherjee. We recently started a casual gaming studio in India called Giga Studios. Prior to this, I have worked at Zynga for close to 4 years, where I have worked across different genres in games, namely simulations, casino, casual. Post that, I've worked across a number of startups, making games for India, Moonfrog Labs, where I've worked as a part of the real-time strategy game, and my recent stint was with Mobile Premier League, where I've worked at Real Money Gaming. At GigaFund Studios, at GigaFund Studios, our core thesis is the power of storytelling and the power of localizing games. And that's what we are looking to build. Over to you, Mayur.
Thanks, yeah. Thanks, Shreyans, for inviting me, and thanks, ICS, for setting this up. Games are so embedded in our lives these days because all of us have a mobile screen, right? And wherever there's new technologies, games are going to be there. And I've been very fortunate to be in this industry from an early time. We've been actually colleagues at Zynga for quite some time. And about in 2015, I struck out on my own to start Hypernova Interactive. At Zynga, I used to lead design for some of their largest games like Farmville, Castleville. A lot of you might not remember them. They're all from the browser era days when Facebook made obscene amounts of money from games rather than advertisements. We've seen the Indian games industry itself from where I joined grow from just about 20, 25 studios in the entire country, and most of them focused on services rather than product development, to go ahead and have over close to 400 companies in the space right now. So we've seen some phenomenal growth, and I've been very fortunate to work with people like Krishnendu and a whole bunch of other folks. So at Hypernova, in the last 7.5 years or so, we've built over 50 games, not just our own. We've built a lot of games with our partners. But right now, for the last 2.5 years, we've focused on building games for India. The idea being there's, like Krishnendu, there's about 150 crores of us Indians out there in the world, not just here in the country, but everywhere else. They're all feeling pretty ignored. So we're trying to address that. Right now, what we're building is a game called Maya Nagri, which is somewhat similar to Grand Theft Auto. It's inspired by that, if any of you is familiar with that. So, yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Mayur. I think a little bit about us. So, Fireside Ventures is a classic consumer and consumption-driven, thesis-driven venture capital fund. We have about $400 million capital, and I kind of look at a few areas of investments at Fireside, and particularly gaming is one amongst them, where the fund and in general the kind of ecosystem has been very excited about of late, and one of the primary reasons is the topic of the conference, which is commerce. So a little bit about commerce in games. You would assume that gaming is a fun thing, and it's a fun to do industry. All of that is true. But globally, gaming is 3 times bigger than movies and music combined in terms of revenue. And that is what gaming is all about. It is the next form of consumption. Everybody in every part of the world is loving this form of consumption, and this is translating into commerce. India is no exception. The latest numbers are out. It is projected to be close to $8.5, $9 billion industry in the next 5 years, already $2.5 billion industry today. And what you would not believe is that 500 million people in our country play video games every day. They play about 80 hours a week, and there are 120 million users who are willing to pay, right? And hence the aspect of commerce kind of becomes very exciting, and you will see a lot of experienced founders who have run games for global companies kind of now wanting to do it for India, and which is where the excitement stems from. So obviously there is a lot of buzz and excitement, and there are a lot of tailwinds, and that are going to the propensity to pay is becoming very higher. And especially with 5G going to come into the picture, a lot of these, not just smaller genres, but heavy genres would kind of really benefit from real-time gaming, which is going to unlock commerce even further. So I think, going into the topic, let's first understand, the consumer who kind of, is kind of the center of building the business around. And what is important to understand is that I think both Mayur and Krishnendu alluded to it, that there are two very amazing themes that are being played out in the country, which are very core to building commerce in the gaming ecosystem. A is localization or Indianization. And it stems from the fact that the Indian consumer is just like a consumer in the West, but is unserved. There are not enough entrepreneurs trying to solve for this need, and there is a major underserved need for localization of content and a localization of gaming in general, right? It's a very deep topic, and content is just a part of it. And second, everybody associates gaming success today with real money gaming, right? There are 3 unicorns in gaming in India. All 3 are primarily today into real money gaming. However, there are 6 more companies which have kind of exited at hundreds of millions of dollars, who have nothing to do with real money gaming. And the factor behind all of this is what we called as IAPs, or in-app purchases. In-app purchases today is 20% of the pool of revenue, estimated to become 30% of the pool of revenue in 5 years. It'll be as big as the entire gaming industry today. And which is why it is important to marry the two and build your commerce around it, right? So let me first understand from, entrepreneurs who have done it for large successful games globally, to understand how do you think about these two aspects of a consumer, and then we'll kind of marry it to the commerce part of it. So Krish, if you'd like to go first on these two themes.
Thank you, Shreyans. So I think in-app purchases and real money wagering have been 2 main ways of monetizing, probably from post free-to-play era. Prior to that, you had games, you go out to a store, you buy a CD, you pay one time, and then you have the content. And what in-app purchase was able to do is not ask you to commit and hire sum of money for a predetermined amount of content, but break it out into, okay, you play for free. You experience the game, And then as and when you feel the game is worth it for you, you pay pockets of money. On one side, that allowed players to really look at the final product that they're buying and decide how much they want to pay, when they want to pay. And for people who like the product that much, the company was also able to extract an amount of money beyond the $40 they would have paid. So that forms the backbone of in-app purchases. So in-app purchase is not as much about the purchase as it is about the content that you are buying, the amount of time that you're committing to. And that's the entertainment that you're buying. Real money gaming is wagering, and wagering is part of the gameplay. You want to bet higher, you want to win more, and you want to utilize whatever skill you have in the specific wagering that you do. So at least internationally, what has happened, these player bases, these two are very different itches that are being scratched. So these sort of bifurcate in matured markets into two very different types of companies, industries, regulations, commerce, bodies, etc. And that's how India is also going to evolve. So that's my opinion on how in-app purchases is content commerce, whereas something like real money gaming is the commerce of skill gaming, is the commerce of wagering. And that's how it's going to evolve and bifurcate into two. Mayur?
Right. So what we've seen here in real money gaming is, right, like, because games as a medium of entertainment has been fairly new for Indian audiences in the last decade. So the idea that I spend some rupees to own a T-shirt that I'm going to own inside of a game was very alien to Indian consumers. So for them, the idea that okay, I can bet 5 rupees or 10 rupees, and I can win a higher amount than that by playing a game and winning at it seemed a lot more straightforward and made a lot more sense than you know, why would I want to buy something and own it, because nobody's going to be able to see it, right? But when we looked into some of the data deeper, what we realized is that you just need to chip away at that, right? Like, and what we realized is most of the people who are ending up paying even a few rupees to games in India, majority of them are D90 users and above. What that means is ki the player or the consumer has to spend about 3 months on average inside of your game, playing the game in and out, being engaged with it. It becomes part of their life, and that's when they become more susceptible. Okay, let me spend some money, right? So what we've realized specifically for India is that long shelf life games that have a much higher shelf life are doing way better than games that are trying to monetize in the first 2 weeks of the consumer downloading the app in India in terms of in-app purchase. But the real money gaming thing has been fairly straightforward, and people seem to enjoy it quite a bit in India. But what we see as the next big shift happening here is that, when we look at multiple markets, right, like each market goes through a cycle in terms of what kind of games that they are playing and where the adoption is at, right? So if you look at the trajectory of China, roughly about a decade back, the only games that made money there were like casual games and casino games, right? You had games like Yahtzee, and you had a bunch of these other Chinese casino games, like just say the way we have Teen Patti and Rummy here, which is specifically to India. There are a bunch of Chinese casual and casino games. Those were the ones that were really making money about a decade back. Then comes the shooter games, which what we call as what you see is what you get game. What that means is like you don't need special knowledge to understand the game and to be able to play it. Right? Like for example, if you're playing something like a PUBG or a Call of Duty, you pick up a gun and you shoot the gun. You see a car, you get inside the car, you drive the car. We don't have to teach the player something special that they don't already know from their real life. Okay, I already understand what a car does. I already understand what a gun does, right? But then the third phase, as the market matures, is when you start seeing extremely complex and a lot more demanding games, like role-playing games that involve and demand a lot more time from the player. and those are the ones that monetize the highest because there's so much time a player is spending in that virtual world. So in India, we see India to be somewhere between the what you see, what you get phase, and moving towards the more complex games, which is where we are building games in that space right now. And roughly in 3 to 4 years, we expect RPG games also to sort of start taking root in India and more complex games. Because once people start getting bored of just playing shooters, they're going to want deeper engagement and deeper entertainment.
Thanks. Very interesting point of view. And, peeling one more layer of this onion, why does the user even want to pay, right? So it is important to understand that the users of games are not children. Some recent survey numbers tell you that almost 40% of the players are female players, and a very big chunk of players are in the 18 to 35 bracket. These are not just young kids, and hence the commerce is also possible. Games have become a form of entertainment for everybody. And therefore, it is important to understand that why do consumers want to pay, right? The motivation of a 30-year-old female may be different to pay and to purchase an object within a game versus a 15-year-old, right? The kind of thought process is different. And is kind of what goes into designing the business model. So it's important that we spend 2 minutes to understand that why do different types of people want to purchase and break this myth that only kids play game. And let's take maybe so Krishnendu is going to be building a state of the art game in the casual gaming space, and let's talk from your lens that who could be the users and why would they pay.
Yeah, thanks, Shreyan. So there is this statement that I subscribe to, which is boredom is extremely equal opportunity. Everybody gets bored, and everybody gets bored to various extents. Now, what gets you not bored evolves as you age. As a child, as Mayur mentioned, something like a racing or something like a shooter, it's a very direct type of a gameplay. As you grow older, you would probably want something a little bit more thinky, something a little bit more cognitive load. As you are, like for example, my mother-in-law plays solitaire, not on phone. She plays solitaire with a deck of cards. That's because she's bored. It's not like people in India don't play. It's just that people who are 40-year-old today, 60-year-old today, 20-year-old today, their experience and exposure to gaming has been very different from the globe. We are a generation that has skipped PCs. Most of us, the first time we have seen a game was on the phone, and that is a probably last 10-year phenomenon. So we understand gaming as 4 people getting together and playing Ludo. We understand gaming as 4 people getting together and playing Rummy. And when that experience can be translated on the mobile phone, where you can genuinely feel that you're playing with your family members, you're playing with someone else, or you're just playing alone, but you're getting in the zone, that's when you're going to convert some of these individual pockets of gamers. So boredom is universal, but what scratches that itch for different segments is different. And yes, I think I would love to hear Mayur's point of view on how you see the evolution to go beyond point and shoot, which is there today, in midcore specifically. Yeah, over to you.
Before that,
Yeah.
I think context, Hypernova game is not launched yet, but their thought process is to build a class-leading product in the mid-core segment, which is kind of on the other end of the spectrum. And therefore, it's maybe the same user base, different user base, but the motivation to buy could be very different. And maybe Mayur, if you want to talk from your perspective, that how you're going to think about.
Mayur, before we get into that, one more point to add to that in terms of monetization. So while we have been in this industry, there has been a prevalent thought that the Indian consumer will not monetize through games. You marry that with the reality that 10 years, 20 years ago, and that is true even today, if you're going 5 friends on a road trip and you stop at a cigarette shop You will probably buy a few bottles of soft drink, you will probably buy a few cigarettes, and one guy will say, "Ek packet patta le lete hain." Because at night you will get bored and you guys are going to sit together and play cards. So, and for that, people are willing to pay 20 bucks, 30 bucks. People are willing to pay money for games when they see it worth the entertainment that it entails. What gaming needs to do is communicate that simply and so obviously, and people are willing to open up their wallets. Yes, Mayur, over to you.
So here, we come from we both come from Zynga. So we have this central design philosophy that a whole bunch of folks at Zynga did a lot of research and identified. It's called invest and express. What that means is, okay, the games are entertaining you, but are you getting the players invested in whatever that virtual world is? And is there an avenue for them to express themselves? Right now, you can, depending upon what the game is, people can express in different ways, right? Like, for example, what Krishnendu's building, the expression there is the kind of decorations, the kind of art, the way you're building your home, etc. Right? Like, versus in what we are building, it's not just expression at a single player level where I'm going to be able to look at what exciting things I'm creating for myself, but let's say I'm wearing a fancy set of clothes when I'm going out to fight somebody else in a battle that makes me look cool, right? So that's a meaning of expression. So if you get the player invested and if you give them great avenues to express themselves, and the bigger those avenues, the more social validation they'll get. And we are basically then trying to play at core human psychology, right? Where in India specifically, like I mentioned, the investment parts needs to be higher compared to some of the other mature markets that we've looked at, where people feel comfortable in this virtual world and feel comfortable starting to give you some money when they get invested a lot more, right? So that's the fundamental sort of two principles that drives in-app purchases or purchases of any virtual items in any virtual. You get them invested and you give them an avenue to express themselves.
Thanks. Very important clarity of thought to understand the consumer. So I think now let's dive deeper and spill the secret sauce. So let's break down commerce and monetization. And let's talk from the perspective of what are the various forms of monetization and what are the key metrics to drive monetization on those fronts. Let me start by saying that, let's into three brackets. A, real money gaming, I think fairly well understood in our country. IPL ads. B, in-app purchases. Advertisement-driven revenue. Right? I think, while I'm no expert, I think it is important from an investor lens to kind of very clearly segregate that there is a major distinction in what metrics drive what. For example, in-app purchases, like Mayur alluded to, is something driven by higher investment and engagement, and therefore the retention beyond 30, 60, 90 days, very important to target. In the world of gaming, we measure retention in short tenures of day 1 retention, day 7 retention, day 30 retention, and so on and so forth. And when you contrast this with an advertisement-driven revenue, you'll realize that the focus is on monetizing in D1 to D. And hence, the multiple aspects of monetization start to kick in. So let's kind of talk a little bit deeper about the business metrics, and let's maybe first understand in-app purchases. If you have to think about in-app purchases, what are the core metrics that would be very important, and what would your advice be, by the way, to industry partners, B, younger entrepreneurs who want to be looking up to you to think this through, that what would be the metrics? How do you think about those metrics in terms of game design, in terms of engineering, in terms of product, etc.? So maybe let's start with you, Krish.
Thank you, Shreyans. So let me go all metric on this. There is only one metric in-app purchase-based games, which is the same metric in any business, which is lifetime value of the customer. That is the single North Star metric. It makes or breaks your business. It allows you to acquire users. It allows you to run a business. In the absence of that, there is no game, there is no business. Lifetime value. And lifetime value, if I double click on it, lifetime value has two aspects. One is the retention aspect, which is essentially how invested your players are, how long are they playing the game, and how much are they playing the game. But in the context of in-app purchases, the business is a longer term business. You don't need your players to play, say, 5 sessions in a day. As long as they're getting one solid 20-minute session at the same time of the day every day, you are part of their daily journey. And that is sort of the goal when it comes to planning out retention. All retention is not necessarily awesome retention. If you can get people to get into the habit, you're seeing those spikes at times of day, that means you're targeting the right player base, you're targeting the right design elements, and you are sending the right notifications to bring them back. So you're creating the habit. And then you wait. You wait for the next metric, which is user conversion. Now, conversion, like Mayur mentioned, different demographic of users have different conversion thresholds. That's a function of just socioeconomic condition of that market. Conversion period can be as low as day 3 for matured markets and as high as day 180 for very early days of Battle Royale in India. So that's a matter of the market. But you won't monetize anyone on day 180 if they don't come back on day 180. So the metric that gets you there is retention, and then you wait. It's like opening a shop, and as long as people are walking into your shop, you still have a way of converting them. And then you wait for them to make their first purchase. So that's in-app purchases. Mayur.
So, conversion that Krishnendu mentioned is like sort of the number one thing we worry about. Because the thing we've seen, right, is that once the player spends even, let's say, 5 rupees in a digital world, the propensity to spend the next time is way higher. Because you've broken that mental block, okay, I can spend money here, right? So which is where we use a lot of classical real world physical sales techniques like anchoring, price comparisons, discounting, and a whole bunch of classical marketing strategies we use to get them to do their first purchase, right? Because once you've done your first purchase, then there's that psychological shift for the player. Okay, I can spend money in this, right? Till the time they are at that cusp where they've not spent any money in, is when you're really looking to try and convince that customer, okay, why is there value in your game? Why is it interesting? So for in-app purchase specifically, obviously, the name of the game at the end of the day is lifetime value versus cost per install for us as well. Because right now, and our unit economics works very similar to now SaaS businesses, right? Because we are not selling physical goods like some of you folks here, right? So once we create a product, the cost for us to resell one more unit of that product is just the incremental cost of acquiring that customer, right? We're selling bits on a server. It works like a SaaS business. The more we sell of that product, the more profitable that product becomes. So we try and figure out, okay, how quickly and how early can we get somebody to spend like the first 5 rupees, 10 rupees, we give them like obscene amounts of very disproportionate amounts of value for that first purchase when we're trying to get them to be comfortable spending money inside that virtual world. So once you break that barrier, it's a lot easier then for the player to come in and start spending money.
Thanks. I think to close this, before we move to, let's say, advertisement-driven purchases, I think what would be a flavor of items that people could buy at various stages of monetization across different genres? The mid-core, what would be the top 3-4 things that you would want your users to buy, feel happy about, and enjoy their time? And same thing goes for casual.
So for mid-core games, there are mainly 2 models at high level. One is called pay to win, other is called fair play, right? What that means is pay to win model says we are going to give you uh, an advantage inside of the game if you give us more money, right? Like maybe my gun does more damage than your gun, or my car drives faster than your car, right? Like that's sort of the pay to win model. Versus what PUBG or Fortnite or some of these largest games that have humongous shelf life, what they focus on is more like a fair play model, where for them the sanctity of a game session or a match is the highest, right? Because being able to play the game and having that dopamine hit, whether I'm winning, whether I'm losing, that's way more important. That's sacrosanct, right? So you try and preserve that as much as possible. So for us, we fall in the fair play sort of the path we are following, where we are looking at a much higher shelf life for the product of about 7 years, 7 to 10 years, right? Versus the other category where you're looking at a pay to win model, you're trying to maximize a lot more in a shorter duration from the player. So depending upon what bigger model you're following at a higher stage, it'll differ as to what are the kind of things you're selling, right? So if you're following the pay to win model, you're obviously trying to sell more and more advantages that the player will have inside of the game environment, whether it be guns, whether it be cars. Versus when you're trying to do the fair play thing, which is what Fortnite and some of these games are doing, there you focus more on the cosmetic side of things, where uh, what are the cool clothes I can buy? Can I get a Travis Scott model inside of the game? Can I sell a Batman costume inside of the game? So depending upon what's your core philosophy for the product, you'll choose one of those lines.
Thanks, Mayur.
And when it comes to casual, there is the third model, which is pay to progress. Big part of casual games is you're playing alone mostly. You're playing for flow. You're playing because you're bored. Maybe you're waiting for the bus, or you're waiting in the waiting room, or maybe some of you guys are playing. And at this time, you're probably not opening up your phone to play a session of PUBG where you're competing and hard into it. You're probably playing a couple of levels of Candy Crush. And at that moment, if you get stuck, you will probably be open to paying a 5 rupee to go to the next level just because you're bored. And that's indexing on boredom and corresponding content to undo that boredom. That is the central tenet when it comes to casual, which is pay to progress.
Great. Thank you so much for this insight. And I think we can visualize who is purchasing it, why are they purchasing it, what are they purchasing, and how do you think about the core metric LTV kind of drive this. And let's peel one more layer of the onion, and let's say LTV, which stands for lifetime value. What are top 2 or 3 metrics that are important to drive commerce if you have to drive LTV? What will drive LTV and hence?
Okay, so again, this is not very different, as you mentioned, from a lot of digital businesses. Like if you look at even social media businesses or OTT businesses, you have two aspects of it. One being your retention. So D1 retentions, D30 retentions for a company like Facebook, or even a company like Epic, who makes Fortnite, it can be something like D365 retentions. So just your retention and retention window. You install on a day, N number of days later, are you coming back and engaging with the product? So that's one primary driver. And then you add to it, how frequently are you paying? So that is your conversion, repeat purchase. And eventually, once you are used to purchasing, how are you able to purchase more, which is your rev per user, ARPPU, what we call it. So these form the core ingredients of game monetization. Add to this the chemical X, which is entertainment, in the absence of which neither of this will happen. So
apart from all the stuff that Krishnendu mentioned, for us, the other important thing we track a lot is how big is an average session on average, right? Because for us and for the kind of products we build, it's not like Candy Crush, which is like a toilet game, we call it, right? Basically, you're sitting on the toilet, you have 5 minutes. What to do? Let me play one level of Candy Crush. Or I'm standing in the bus, sitting in a cab, have 10 minutes. What do I do? For us, it's a lot more deeper engagement. where we expect the player to spend anywhere between, half an hour to up to 2 hours, 3 hours into the game, and get lost and immersed in the product, right? So that's the another big metric we track, because engagement is what's going to, at the end of the day, drive revenue, right? Because if you don't have engagement, revenue तो नहीं होगा. मतलब कितना भी सुंदर आपका product दिखे, कितना भी सही क्यों ना हो, if you don't have people sticking around, and which again Krishnendu alluded to, is at the heart of all of it is fun, right? Is your game fun or not, right? That's what it boils down to at the end of the day. Why will somebody pay a 1,500 rupee thing to go watch Avatar otherwise, right? Like अभी चल रहा है James Cameron का.
Absolutely. I think that's very important. I think overall to understand the reason this industry is booming is because it is so much fun for people to play, right? And in the process, if they're consuming some content, I think it's making everybody happy. So I think let's, in the interest of time, I think we have about 5-10 minutes left. So let's just talk about one last topic, which is the data part of it. I think unlike a lot of other traditional consumer businesses, games are deeply driven by data and a lot of science behind it. And the business models are run with a lot of deep analytics. So maybe, just broad question, what are the top 2-3 roles of data in, various genres of games, and, what does it take to kind of, build, a gaming company around which is data centric?
So the broadest theme in data when it comes to games, and that is also true for most digital products, is the ability to experiment with your user base. It can feed into casual games like us, where it feeds into what is your level difficulty journey, and figuring out at what journey do you have the optimum players really sticking around, finding that fine balance between winning levels and losing levels. For something like midcore, it forms the core backbone of how you matchmake players. Who do you put in the same room at whom? So experimenting and see at the end of the day, games are a place where there is player agency. It's interactive. So people actually behave inside the game, and that forms who they should be playing with and what they should be playing with. So that's what forms like the broad umbrella of what data contributes to.
In fact, let me, add one more point and break this myth. A lot of people think that, a successful game is like a movie. You don't know it will work or not. And this is where the data comes into picture to tell you, and to a word which Krishnendu alluded to, real-time interaction that is possible in this kind of genre. And by genre, I mean gaming as a form of entertainment versus movies, and the ability of data to discern it real time. And I think with that, maybe Mayur, you could also shed some light that a lot of people seem to think that, ये movie है चलेगी नहीं चलेगी पता नहीं, and which is where if you can break the myth of how deeply you think about data in an organization which is gaming organization.
So, the great thing Krishnendu mentioned is games are about agency, right? Like, so when you talk about movies, right? So movies are all about empathy. You're looking at a character, story play out on the screen. You're trying to empathize with their emotions. You're trying to empathize with what they're going through. In games, it's all about agency, right? It's me who's doing the action. Me who's the powerful one inside this universe, right? And I am the one who's either creating, destructing, or having fun. Right? So it's all about the player and making them feel, having fun and powerful. But the big thing there that breaks between movies and games is that because games are agency driven, they transcend borders, right? They transcend languages. Right? You see PUBG doing really well in China, Korea, India, Brazil, US, Europe, everywhere, right? Like, I mean, Rajamouli भी है, मतलब वो भी कर रहा है सही सब जगह पे, but the point is, you'll find very few of those sort of movies that connect with so many different geographies in a way like. So a lot of the trends, when we even start building a product similar to what we are doing, because our gestation cycles are like 3.5 years before we even launch the product. Right? Krishnendu works in a shorter cycles, but for us, it's super important to look at leading data points. Okay, what's the kind of revenue these products have made in other markets? What's the kind of download traction we are seeing in this genre in India? And what's the kind of retention numbers we are seeing on existing games in this area? And that's all even before we start the product, right? And the beauty of that is that games don't work like movie script, where if something fails in a movie script, the movie's not going to work, right? Versus in games, we have real-time manipulation that we can do with features, with things, a whole bunch of levers we have to change things and alter things as the things go along, right? So the idea there being that if a battle royale game is doing really well, like PUBG in India, there's a great chance that another battle royale game might also do very well. Versus it might not be the case where, okay, there's an action movie doing well in this country, so other action movies are also going to. That will depend on the script of that movie specifically, and Rajamouli can't edit his script live once it's released. Right? So that's the luxury we folks have. And just to talk a little bit about data, right? Like, so we look at, we try and classify data mainly into three types of buckets: retrospective, real-time, and future-facing. Right? So retrospective is when you're just looking at, okay, what was the performance and how do we learn from it? What's going wrong in the funnel? Okay, what's the user behavior for this feature? Real-time is we use for some things like what Krishnendu mentioned, which is matchmaking, right? Like, are you matching the players that have the similar skill levels, the same rooms? So we're looking at a lot of real-time data to do some of that stuff. And then there's the future facing, which is A/B testing, right? Like you're trying to test, okay, does this work better? Does that work better? And trying to plan that ahead of time, even before you're putting it out.
Thanks, Krish. Any final words from your side?
Yeah, so I think on the movie piece, and this is something that I feel very strongly about because this is something we keep on talking. Excuse me. So games being like movies, games were like movies at one point in time. That's where the notion comes from. Games were like movies where games were just that one CD that you get, and that's the entire game. You pay for it, and then it is what it is. And so were movies. Today, movies have also evolved. You look at Netflix. Netflix has data on when you are dropping off from a type of script. They can create a playbook of romantic comedies based on a particular geography and 100 romantic comedies and where people drop off. So movies on OTT platforms with data are able to do today what games have probably been doing quite covertly, because then, so today actually we are more like movies on OTT platforms because movies also have a lot of underlying data. You have data from your YouTube channels on which are the clips that are getting played more. You have data on what sort of crests and troughs that you need in your content delivery. Where do people drop off? And that is why a lot of formalized films are having hit over hit over hit. You look at some of the stuff Rohit Shetty is doing. He clearly has a playbook. He's not just doing every script just out of creativity. So just this aspect of using data to engineer growth is becoming a core part of delivering entertainment. Because now, because of phones, because of softwares, we get feedback on what players like or not like. And that forms the core. At the end of the day, we are in the business of entertaining people. And yeah, now we know whether we did or not.
Thanks, Krishnendu. Thanks, Mayur. I hope we've been able to give some color to commerce aspect of gaming and kind of hopefully shed some myths about gaming in our country. It's a major commerce driver over the next decade, and hope you all enjoyed it.
Thank you, guys.